Welcome to the Relational Approach podcast. I'm your host, Deborah Bakhti. I'm looking forward to you hearing this conversation that I just had with Liane Davey. And Liane is actually a New York Times bestselling author of 3 books. And how I met her was through reading her book called The Good Fight: Use Productive Conflict to Get Your Team and Your Organization Back on Track. And we touched a little bit on using an example of seniors care, how to be able to effectively and productively use conflict. And I also asked her about her forthcoming book, and we talked about some really interesting concepts that she has around it's not about the workload, it's the thought load. So I think you're really going to enjoy hearing what Liane has to share. Hi, Liane. Welcome to the Relational Approach podcast. I'm so glad that you could join us today.
Hi, Deborah. I'm so glad to be here. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, me too. Well, why don't we start with you just sharing a little bit about you and what you do, and then we'll pick it up from there.
Yeah. So I'm Dr. Liane Davey. By way of background, I have a PhD in organizational psychology, and I've spent the past more than 25 years helping people deal with all the messy stuff so that they can achieve amazing things together. So I do some consulting with CEOs and their teams. I do some speaking, I do some writing, but all with that focus of helping people achieve amazing things together.
Well, and I think I first got introduced to you when I read your book, The Good Fight. And we've had some conversation about that. And we may touch on that where it comes to how to have positive conflict.
Yes.
But I really want to jump in. I know that you're working on a new book, and I would love, because as soon as I read in your newsletter, which I encourage people to sign up for, when I read about this, I thought, oh, we've got to talk about this because it's so relevant in the world of seniors care and, of course, everywhere else. So
Everywhere else. Yeah, thank you. I think I'm a glutton for punishment. This is book number 4, and the first 3, there was 6 years between them, and this time I think it'll be 7 because it takes a lot. So this is a book for people who just want to perform and produce and prosper, just want to do this important work that you do, but feel like you're being asked to do more and more with less and less, and really aren't realizing that to a certain extent the problem is not just our workload, but our thought load. And so this is the new term that I've coined, which is a combination of 3 things. The thought load that you have in any given day is a combination of that cognitive load, all the things you're paying attention to, the number of emails coming in, the number of, there's staffing issues you need to deal with, have messages coming in from families, there's just so much there, and that's just work. Now, there's a huge cognitive load of just all the things you have. Don't forget the dry cleaning, those sorts of things. So thought load is partly all that cognitive load, but partly the emotional weight of life these days, because our society is becoming increasingly emotionally dysregulated. You're having to experience your own perceptions of threat and fear. Certainly inflation, rising costs, tariff, trade wars, whatever it is, wars, actual wars,
mhm.
um, and just even good old road rage and grumpy people on the subway. And so just the amount of emotion, and at home we're raising the most socially anxious generation of children ever. So we've got this huge emotional weight that we're also carrying. And then if you take both of those things, as if it's not enough, we're trying to carry that load with energy reserves that are getting lower and lower because we are, trying to do too much. We are emotionally triggered. It burns us out. We are not putting good fuel into our bodies. We are not getting the time outside and just having fun and relaxing and being in nature and exercising. And so, at night, we're not honestly tired. We're kind of exhausted, but we're not tired. And so we're kind of scrolling on TikTok or having a glass of wine to help us fall asleep. Both of those things are disrupting our sleep and it all starts again. So thought load is this morass of cognitive load, emotional weight, and these low energy reserves that make just, doing anything right now feels like trying to run through thigh high water. And, that's what has to change.
Yeah.
We all need work needs to be more productive. It needs to be less stressful. It needs to be more rewarding. If you think of the work that your audience does, it's powerful, important, compelling work. But how often do you connect to that? Mostly you're just trying to get through it. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. And certainly in healthcare, I think that sometimes the way that people are hardwired is to be reactive,
Uh-huh.
right? We're reacting to whatever crisis or problem or situation that's coming up. And there's a lot of emotional angst that's attached to that.
Of course.
Families bringing their loved one in, there's that emotional angst, but
Right.
also for the care providers with a previous resident leaving, likely because they passed away,
Uh-huh.
new family resident coming in, a lot of uncertainty, and all
Yeah.
the things that you described of another busy day. What are you finding in your research for this book are
Uh-huh.
some ways that people can, I mean, it sounds like first of all, we need to increase the level of awareness that this is a
Yes.
problem and it sounds like it's escalating. It's not
Yeah.
going in the right direction.
Yeah.
Um, Share just a bit that what you're learning about that you really want to be further exploring.
Yeah. So 3 things. So the antidote to thought load is to focus your attention. I caught myself the other day. I had been in my bedroom, like I was brushed my teeth and was getting ready for the day, and I just felt this frenetic, like I was thinking about all that I had to get done and busy, busy week, and I put on all my clothes except a hoodie, and I grabbed the hoodie and I was going down the stairs trying to put on the hoodie. And I thought, "This is not safe." Like, I'm gonna wipe out down the stairs. And because I'm writing this book, it was great to be like, "What is going on? Like, what made you feel like you don't have enough time to, like, stop and put on your hoodie before you go down the stairs?" But that's what it feels like. So I think you're right. The first thing is acknowledging that we are in an unhealthy state. In the healthcare field, this is the state in which we make mistakes. We make dosage mistakes in medication. We forget about somebody that we needed to come back to. So this is a dangerous from a safety perspective, this is a dangerous state to be in. So first we acknowledge, but then we focus our attention. What is the one thing I'm a pain? And I've seen a lot of interesting things in nursing now where they're putting, like, when people are doing meds, they're putting signs physically on their body that show this person cannot be interrupted. Like, do not, whatever you do, I don't care what your reason is, do not interrupt them. They are doing a job that requires their full attention. Now, if only other sectors of the economy were as smart about understanding focus. So
Yeah.
there's a variety of things we can do to improve our focus, but everything in that constellation is top of the list. Second on the list, reducing our anxiety. And reducing our anxiety, the biggest thing we can do in this space is to begin to understand that emotions are different from feelings. Emotions are a very physiological experience. They are precognitive. They are not things we have control over, but they are very instructive and very helpful. They are a sign that our body is perceiving, in some cases, opportunity, something positive, but in many cases, something that we perceive as a threat. And it's really important for us not to. And of course, you can think about how many of your listeners, how many times during the day they just try and, stifle that emotion, push it to the side, compartmentalize it,
Mm-hmm.
push it under the bed. And we know that that's incredibly unhelpful and unhealthy as well. So how do I be much faster at recognizing that I'm having an emotional reaction or a threat response and interrupt the path between that and then our feelings, which is this story we tell ourselves about to help us understand or make sense of what we're feeling in our bodies. But unfortunately, those stories are often fiction. They're not very accurate. They're not helpful. They're often very negative. Um, and so all the work that we can do. So the biggest thing here, get one of the meditation apps, do the 10 minutes a day, just get good at tuning into your body. Where is this happening? Is my heart racing? Are my palms sweating? Is my stomach getting nauseated? And the more we can tune into what the emotional reactions are, the better able we'll be to interrupt the path from that to some catastrophic thinking about, how I can't cope with this or they're out to get me or whatever else. So that's a big piece around reducing anxiety and then conserving energy. And that's really about understanding, kind of understanding human performance. How do you work best? If you think about your day, where are you putting in the breaks? How are you using those breaks? How are you distributing things that really drain your batteries? How do you distribute those throughout the week? And in between them, how do you have things that charge your batteries? So thinking more deliberately about all of those and of course things that drain and charge our batteries are, it's a long list. Is there reconnecting to the meaning? Is there one resident in your location that just lights you up and popping in there for 5 minutes will just remind you why you do this work? Or is it a playlist? I have a playlist that I put on in between my little 45-minute sprints of work that I just can't feel grumpy when I'm listening to that playlist, or some people like a quick walk around the block. So those three things, getting ruthless about focusing your attention, getting wise about understanding the difference between emotions and feelings, and then relentlessly conserving your energy so that you've got tons of it to use on the things that really matter.
So, where you're seeing this work, I would imagine the culture, the organization needs to be recognizing, being aware, and really giving care team members or staff members permission to be intentional with this, because I could just hear people working in seniors care listening to this and saying, but Liane, we don't have time for that. Like, we have our shift, we got to start, go, go, go. We've got 30 residents. We've got to get ready and dressed to breakfast by 8:30, whatever the scenario is.
Yeah.
And yet, so that's where sometimes I find that with this type of work, we're competing with what's urgent.
Yep. But I think it's because we're not stopping to be planful. Like, I got a question in a corporate environment about like, but urgent things come up or whatever. I'm like, yeah, well, there are hospital emergency departments where that's all that comes up. But because of that, they're smart and they staff and they plan and they create structures and systems and processes that allow them to be responsive in those situations. So it's the same, in seniors care, there's so much routineness to it all, right?
Mm-hmm.
So great. That the breakfast routine and the toileting routines and everything else that you're doing, there is predictability to those things. It's one of the really positive things about that level of care. Great. So are we together figuring out, by law, nursing staff need to have their breaks? It's just a matter of, are we being wise about how we use those breaks, right? So what is something I could do during the break that's going to give my brain a bit of a rest, that's a change of pace, a change that can actually make me walk into the next room more energized, more ready with a bigger smile versus, sometimes what we do on our break is we go to the coffee room and we complain about a bunch of stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
so one of the things I'm writing about in the book, very cool science about emotional contagion and how the emotional state of one person transfers to those around them without them knowing. So think about what's going on in the break room. Like, what is the conversation? And is that positive emotional contagion about what a great team you are and about how you're able to cope with all this and how you have each other's backs? Or is it conversation complaining about things? That emotional contagion is going to spread to you, or you're going to spread it to somebody else, and then you're going to go walk into a room and spread that further. So thinking about, you have a break. It's not long. It doesn't need to be long. The data are, 10 minutes can completely reset you if you choose to use it wisely. So
Yeah.
I don't think there is any workplace. I think even if we go to extremes, like people in combat, when you get into the extremes, that's when all these things make all the more difference, all the more importance. There's nobody, if you think about high performance athletes, they are hacking rest and restoration more than anybody. So I don't think there's a place where we can have the excuse that, my work's too busy, too important, too whatever. It's not too busy to actually manage my mood effectively. It's not too busy to manage my attention in a way that I do not make errors that can affect people's lives. Like, it's actually so important, the work you do, that you need to be deliberate about these things, right? And the excuses of, I don't have time, well, then you need to think differently about how the day plays out so that you are better able to do these three things. Get your attention focused, keep your anxiety levels where you need them and don't spread them to other people, and make sure that you are conserving and using your energy really wisely.
And so that sounds like it really is about prioritizing self-care. And I think
Yes.
that self-care has been getting a bit of a bad rap.
Yeah.
Like, well, what does self-care mean? And what you've described in a very pragmatic way, because we've got people who are caregivers. And
Right.
so there's a bit of we need to reshift the focus to, in order to be able to provide that care, we
Yeah.
need to be investing in ourselves.
Yeah. The self-care language, like, we take things and then all of a sudden we make them feel soft. Go back to the high performance athlete. When a high performance athlete is elevating their legs and icing and do it. We don't call it self-care. It's
Yeah.
self-care, right? No, it's high performance. It's what it takes to perform at your best, right? We need our healthcare providers being ready to perform at their best. And we know physically, seniors care is incredibly taxing and intensive work. So there's a lot that you need to do physically, but it's more emotionally taxing, right? So there's a lot that you need to do to be emotionally ready for that kind of emotional labor. So, like, if calling it self-care makes you think it doesn't matter or it's a nice to have or it's indulgent, then don't call it self-care. Call it investing in high performance, because that's what it is.
Yeah. Well, as you were describing the steps around that focus and what I think of as that low grade anxiety, I'll give you an example or a scenario that I work with, in that a new resident and their family's moving in, and the staff are feeling anxious because they don't know what the resident's going to be like, the level of care, what's indicated on the file may not be accurate. They also don't know what the family's going to be like. And
Right.
if they've had a prior experience of, in their words, being burned by a difficult family,
Yeah.
then they're anticipating. So they're coming into the relationship almost a bit guarded.
Yeah.
And how I interpret that is that they're draining their energy before they've even started the relationship.
Yeah. They sure are, right? And they're going into a threat response that is not coming from that new family, it's coming from their memory of a previous family. But the problem with us being animals is that our threat response tends to manifest in a whole bunch of ways that are obvious to that new family when they walk in the door. So, our brows are furrowed, our body language is a little closed, we're just a little cool, or and research shows now that your pupils are dilated, so that's really hard to control. So if you're in that threat mode based on some past experience and that family walks in the door and encounters you in that mode, you look threatening, right? You look like, oh, they're not very warm. They don't seem excited to have mom here, right? And then how do you think they're going to behave, right? They're going to be like, did we make a big mistake here?
Yeah.
They're going to be more anxious, that, right? So again, doing that work to separate, okay, I'm having an emotional threat reaction because I'm thinking about that last new person who moved in and all that came from that and how hard that was. So recognize it. You can't stop the reaction. It is preconscious, but stop and recognize it. Talk with one another about it. Okay, this is the story I'm telling myself.
Hmm.
Um, okay, guys, let's come up with another story. Give me an example of somebody who moved in and it was amazing, right? Like let's reflect on one of those before we have this conversation. So, yeah, remember when those anxiety responses happen, in most cases, they're happening based on past experience. But the problem is our reaction can then, predict future experience. And that's a cycle we want to stop. So
Yeah.
be very aware that it's going on for you. Engage your colleagues or your manager's support to say, help me. I'm spun up in this cycle. Help me. Help me think differently and greet that new family with the curiosity, the empathy, the interest, the things that are going to then start off a virtuous cycle because they're going to be like, "Oh my goodness, I'm so relieved we picked the right place." And this is a very taxing, stressful time for all of us, but at least I feel like they know that they're experts in it. They're experts in this stressful transition. I can count on them, right? And that's all based on what did their subconscious read in about 15 seconds worth of how you showed up in that
Yeah.
first meeting.
Because with that previous scenario, they're actually contributing to the problem of the
Yes.
difficult family dynamic.
Yes.
And what I hear from what you're saying is that there's also the opportunity to do, I kind of think of it as priming. How can we
Yeah.
prime ourselves
Right.
and tapping into that curiosity? What if? What if this family is going to become our most favorite family in our whole
Yeah.
home?
Yeah.
Right? Because,
Yeah.
like you say, it's a story that we're making up, and we are hardwired to make assumptions and try to make sense. We try to make sense, but it's our sense that isn't always helpful.
It's not a meme, but there's a one of those like little Instagram quotes that I saw years ago. I'm not going to quote it exactly right, but it was talking about teenagers and it's like the ones who need our love the most show it in the worst ways. Um
Mm,
and that might be true of the family as well. They may so desperately need your professionalism, your understanding of end of life, your expertise in this journey, just your compassion. But the ones who need it the most probably show it in a way that you're like, "Really? Because you're not showing me that you need the love, right?"
yeah,
They're showing you because their anxiety is making them micromanage you or ask questions that you're interpreting as well, they're questioning me or they doubt me or they don't think I know how to do my job. And what they're really doing is trying to make sense and make this new world predictable because it's very scary. So just remembering that the people who need our care the most are often the ones who kind of make it seem like they don't want it, right? But
yeah.
they're the ones who really need it. How do we help that family? How do we help that resident?
Hmm.
Because the ones who are already kind of on top of things, you know, they don't need us as much, right?
Right.
It's the families and the residents who need us. All right, there's the challenge, and let's have each other's backs and figure out. And you know what? The other thing to think of is, teamwork really helps if you can have a tap out moment every once in a while to be like, "You know what? I do not have the energy right now to go in there. Like, can you do that? The buzzer's going for the 7th time this hour.
Hmm.
Please may I ask, can we trade? Can I go, change this bedpan for you and you you do this?" Um,
Yeah.
the teamwork really helps because there are gonna be moments where your energy is low and somebody else is okay. I always think about it. There's moments where you're, like, riding the wave and moments where you're face down in the sand getting pummeled by the wave. If you're face down in the sand being pummeled by the wave, throw to one of your teammates.
Yeah.
That kind of, um, teamwork makes a big difference.
Hmm. Well, and I just want to shift gears for a moment to because you wrote a book called The Good Fight.
Well,
And so it's great for us to be able to ideally go into a relationship and be proactive and lay the groundwork and build the trust and connection from the very start. And we know in real life that misunderstandings happen, assumptions are made, and then all of a sudden we have a disagreement, we have a conflict. And as you say yourself, most people don't like conflict, but in the world of when I'm thinking about a PSW, for example, who's got a
yeah,
family who in their mind is barking at them about something and they
yeah,
just want to retreat or appease the family with a promise or a commitment that is not sustainable, or just retreat.
Yeah.
What are some of your, the framework that you use when it comes to how do you step into and work with that conflict to be able to create an ideal outcome?
Yeah, in that moment, if it feels to you like the family's barking at you, it's because they don't feel seen, heard, or understood, right? That's why people get angry for the most part. Um, and they may feel that, that the level of care that you are able to provide suggests that you don't understand them or value them. You get there in a number of different ways. But the very first step is you have to change that. You have to make them feel seen, heard, understood, valued, right? So usually that means that if they're saying things, you don't care about my dad. I don't know what they're saying, but they're saying something like this. Um, you know, what you want to do, everything in your body is either want to fight that, contradict it. Of course I do. I played pinochle with him for 30 minutes last week or like whatever. You want to fight or you want to flee, right? Like, just get me out of here. Let me go find my manager or let me, right? Pretend I have to go do something else in another room. You freeze, which is you just stand there and take it and you just let the person berate you and feel smaller and more drained and more anxious. Or the last one that you alluded to is called fawn. So fawning is when you suck up and you just like you do any like when you see two dogs and one dog rolls over onto its back and just is like, don't
Hmm.
hurt me, don't hurt me, don't hurt me. And that's when you make the promises that you can't sustain. So recognize that it's going on. That's the first thing. Back to I'm having an emotional reaction, I'm having a stress reaction. Just notice it. But the key thing is then to shift to, okay, what does this person need me to hear? And how can I, as quickly as possible, get that out of my mouth so they at least realize they don't have to yell at me, they don't have to be nasty to me, that I can hear them when they speak calmly, rationally, politely to me. So I might say, okay, it feels like I don't care about your dad, right? And that's something really hard to say and to get out of your mouth because it's so different from what you're feeling inside your head. You're feeling like, "Are you kidding me? Do you know that I have like he's one of 30 people that I'm trying to care
Hmm.
for," and, blah, blah, blah. But, just when you stop and say, "I hear you," that's what it feels like. Then you can even say something else. That that must feel terrible. You must worry so much about him. And then you can that will change their demeanor very quickly because it's not what they're expecting. They're expecting
Right.
you to be defensive, they're expecting you to contradict them, they're expecting you to jump through hoops or make crazy promises. Don't do any of those things. Just make them feel heard. Um, and then you can ask, okay, you can ask questions like, you know, tell me how you came to that conclusion. You can also ask questions like, what would it look like? How do you imagine it? That would make your dad feel loved or make you feel like your dad was loved. Um, you might ask something like, have you talked to your dad about it? That sort of thing.
Hmm.
Um, but all of these things sort of open up possibilities to learn what's actually going on, right? And that's what you need to do in the moment. And it is very contrary to everything as an animal that we want to do when we feel attacked in this way. But thankfully, we're human animals, and so we're capable of a lot. So just hear them, make them feel heard, get the conversation on a different level, and then you can start to ask some questions, understand what that looks like. And you know what? When if you take the time and the effort to kind of speak their truth out of your mouth, then they'll be much more willing to hear your side of the story. Um,
Hmm.
you know, often it's not during visiting hours that I'm coming to spend time with your dad because you're here. So I go elsewhere, right? There's some things you aren't seeing. Uh, they're like, can I share some of these experiences I've had? Whatever else. So, people are more willing to hear your truth after you've showed them that you're invested in theirs. So
Yeah.
that's another important thing.
Well, and it goes back to the when that person is be able to stop for a moment and focus on what's going on in their body, they're
Yeah.
feeling their heart starting to increase. They're
Yes.
noticing that anxiety happening, which takes practice
It
to
does
be able
take
to do
practice.
that, right?
It
But
does.
that creating the awareness,
But it's
uh,
it's practice so
for
worth investing in.
sure.
Now, it doesn't take practice like learning to play Chopin on the piano. Like, 5-10 minutes a day of just noticing. And even just after you listen to this, just for the next 24 hours, pay attention. So thankfully, it's something we can get better at without having to add anything other than just go about our day the way we normally would. But when
Hmm.
the person honks at you in the car and flips you off or whatever, just being like, "Oh, how am I feeling now?" Right? You can
Yeah,
practice anywhere.
yeah, that's great. So as we wrap up, Leanne, I want to ask you, what does a relational approach mean to you?
Yeah, I think if you go back to this, that our world is a relationship-centered world, right? And all of the strategies that I talk about, especially when I'm talking about conflict, are about that connection we have to others, right? It requires self-awareness as the cornerstone because we don't relate well to other people unless we start from self-awareness. But
Hmm.
then it requires that empathy and that ability to create a connection. If we create the connection, we we eliminate the threat response and all these conversations are possible. But if we just start from our self-interest, my view of the world, this is what I need you to know. If we're shoving our truth down the throat of the other person with no relation, with no understanding of how this lands for them, we miss such a huge opportunity. So I think relational approaches are ones where we get out of our own heads and we think about this whole system that we live in and how do we make that system work for us.
Wonderful. Thank you, Leanne, so much. There's been such a great conversation and lots of wonderful takeaways. Appreciate you joining us today.
Thanks so much. I had a blast. Great questions.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for joining us on the Relational Approach podcast. If you're enjoying this topic, I invite you to check out my website, deborahbakti.com. And when you click on the resources tab, you will be able to access a whole bunch of free resources that I would love for you to enjoy. You can also check out these episodes on my YouTube channel. And if you haven't already, make sure that you subscribe on your favorite podcast platform.